button. And hello and welcome to today's Info2Go webinar. My name is Annie Gaines and I am the Continuing Education Consultant here at the Idaho Commission for Libraries, located in somewhat cloudy Boise, Idaho. Our webinars and other continuing education opportunities are funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Everyone is muted, and we encourage you to use the chat feature to ask questions and discuss with other attendees. As you exit the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete an evaluation, and we always appreciate your feedback. Today's topic is an introduction to accessible web design, and our presenters are Allison Maier and Haley Westbrook, both from the Idaho Commission for Libraries. Allison and Haley, please take it away.
Thank you, Annie. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see that. Thank you all for joining us this morning for a discussion about accessible web design. We'll jump into introductions really quickly. My name is Allison Maier. I'm a management assistant here at the Idaho Commission for Libraries, and today is actually my exact 1-year anniversary with the ICFL. Prior to this, I worked in various communications and marketing roles, most recently for the Meridian Library District, which is how I got particularly interested in web accessibility. It had always been an element of my work, but I was involved in a website redesign with a focus on accessibility in that role.
And my name is Haley Westbrook. I am the graphic and web designer here at ICFL. And I am pretty new to this role. I've been here a few months, but I am in charge of building and maintaining all of the agency's websites. And before this, I have worked with nonprofits and libraries working on their websites as well.
So we'll give you everyone a bit of an overview of how we're going to spend this next hour. We'll talk a little bit about what we mean when we say accessible design and why it matters. And then we'll get into an overview of best practices. And I'll say that we're covering a lot of content in a short amount of time, so don't panic. Our intent for this presentation is really just to highlight the main accessibility issues that exist in the online environment, really as a starting point. So you can start looking at your web content differently and start seeing web content elsewhere differently, because the thing about web accessibility is that when you kind of have an understanding of what some of the common issues are, you'll start seeing them everywhere. And that is kind of the critical first step. Is kind of knowing what to consider in the first place. And then from there, you can start implementing some of these practices and updating your content. And so we'll be sharing this presentation along with a lot of links to additional resources. I'll say they're in PowerPoint, so not actually the most accessible format in PowerPoint notes, but we do have a lot of resources to share, and there are a lot of tools that exist for kind of further exploration of these topics. And we're also very open if there are certain things we cover quickly here that you would love to learn more about in the future. We're definitely open for that, and we'll definitely have questions or time for questions at the end. So starting with kind of what are we talking about when we talk about accessible web design? When you're considering your library website or your social media platforms or any other online platforms through which you're interacting with patrons and community members, you can kind of consider that an additional branch of your library. That's like your digital branch. And similar to how you're thinking about setting up a physical space, it's important to think about eliminating barriers to access and doing everything you can to ensure equitable access to the resources that you're providing. And so, in a physical space, that might mean that you need ramps in addition to stairs. There's kind of equivalence in the digital realm that we're going to be talking about. And a phrase that you might see floating out there that I really like is that accessible web design is essential for some and useful for all. It's essential for some people to interact with your content, and overall, accessible design tends to mean stronger design in general. And we'll come back to this point a couple of times to kind of talk a little bit more about what we mean when we say that. So getting a little bit into why this matters. When we're talking about web accessibility, an element of that is web content that interacts well with various forms of assistive technology. And assistive technology are kind of alternative methods for navigating and engaging with online content. And I have listed a lot here because there are a lot that exist. And it's not, the intent in listing all of them is not that you have to be an expert in all of them, although we'll share a link to the article that kind of generated some of this list, so that if you're interested in learning more about these individual technologies, you definitely can. But mostly I'm listing them to give you an idea of the various ways that people are likely to be interacting with your online content, and why it's important to consider these different avenues through which people are interacting with your content. In addition to these technologies that were listed, you can also consider the fact that there are probably going to be people that visit your site that are using various extensions like Google Translate that are translating the English content of your website into other languages. In addition, you can think about just general digital literacy or general literacy, considering your web page maybe from the perspective of someone who is still new to visiting web pages at all, and is it easy to navigate and understand content there. So there's a lot to consider, and in all cases, being really intentional and thoughtful in your design is going to go a long way. And I'll highlight in particular just one piece of assistive technology, which is screen readers, which kind of give users the opportunity to interact with content either through synthesized kind of voice reading out of text or through a braille display. And you'll hear those screen readers mentioned a lot when we're talking about best practices. And it's partly just because it tends to be a catch-all for other accessibility. So if you're designing to interact well with screen readers, you're also going to be designing well for other accessibility considerations. So as you kind of dive more into resources and as we talk about best practices, that's why you'll hear a lot of references to screen readers in particular. Another important reason why this matters is that this is a legal matter, which is, I think, important to highlight also just as you're maybe getting buy-in for kind of putting some time and attention to thinking about online accessibility. I threw up Section 508 because you might hear it mentioned from time to time. It applies mostly to federal agencies, but it's the section of the Rehabilitation Act that essentially says that federal online content has to be accessible. And it really speaks to the importance of prioritizing this. And especially relevant to libraries is the fact that ADA compliance does apply when you're talking about digital as well as physical environments. And it's a very important consideration for that reason as well. And it is becoming more and more important as more and more resources and services are moving online, and it's becoming increasingly important for people to visit websites to access services and information. On a related note, this relates to a very big project that the Commission for Libraries has been focusing on this past year, which is drafting a digital access for all Idahoans plan. And I won't get too in the weeds, but this is sort of a parallel plan to a plan that the Idaho Department of Commerce is working on. So they're focusing really on the infrastructure that's involved in broadband access. So physically, what do you need to get broadband to all Idahoans? Whereas the plan that the ICFL is focusing on is sort of addressing the human barriers to access. So even if people do have access to broadband, what are some other challenges or hesitations that might contribute to some challenges with navigating the digital realm? And part of that work has been doing a lot of data collection this past year. We've been working with Boise State University's Idaho Policy Institute on that data collection, and it involved some statewide surveys, focus groups around the state, and stakeholder interviews. And one theme that came through in all streams of that data collection is that there is a need for better online accessibility and inclusivity of public resources and services. And so there is now a version of the draft plan that is out. You can read it on our website. The public comment period is closed, as the final plan will soon be ready to be released. But it's a goal that is highlighted in the plan, and the plan is really then to be implemented over the next 5 years. And there's a lot of focus on how do we make state agency websites more accessible, but also how do municipalities and libraries also contribute to some of that work. So it'll continue to be a really important consideration and conversation. And that's a good thing, because as I kind of alluded to before, accessible design tends to just be better design overall. Everyone benefits from content that is very well thought out, well edited, simple and easy to understand. If for no other reason than people are really busy and they don't have a lot of time to spend figuring out your content. And so it's worth the extra time that it takes to create content that is accessible and just very thoughtfully designed. This is another slide that's not a great example of the best design, because it is a lot of text, but I wanted to throw it up here partly because you'll see this acronym floating around a lot. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are kind of the main international standards that are out there, and they're really kind of based on these 4 principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. So if you see that language floating around a lot, that's why. But I'm calling these out partly because I think they're good aspects of solid design in general. I mean, they kind of get down to the goal, which is that, is it easy to understand your content? Is it easy to understand how to engage and to actually engage with your content? And that includes different ways that people might be accessing it through different kinds of devices, different types of technology. And so it's all very linked and all worth the time and consideration. And that leads us into kind of an overview of best practices. And I'll turn it over to Haley to start walking through some of that.
Thanks, Allison. So we're going to start off talking about headings and section titles, and that's because it's also a great place for you to start if you're making a new web page. So I think you can go to the next slide, Allison. Perfect. So mapping out the structure that you want your page to be before you actually start adding the content to the page is a good way to have a really good idea of not only what you want the page to contain, but also how people are going to interact with it. So you can think of it similarly to an outline for a report, or if you're making a bulleted list in Microsoft Word, you know how when you indent further, you get a new bullet style that would correlate to an additional heading section. And we'll give you a visual representation of this on the next slide in just a moment. But the reason it's important to do this is because everybody who visits your web page is going to want to skim it really quickly to make sure that the content that they're looking for is there. And so if you're using proper headings and section titles, that's going to allow people who are using screen readers to have that same experience. Screen readers can skip just between headlines, and they skip all the other text on the page to give users that same idea of, okay, this is what the page contains. And on top of that, search engines also do a similar thing to figure out what's on your page, and that's going to help with your ranking on search results. So if people are searching for questions that your website and your library can answer, that's going to help your page show up in those results. So here's an example that we took from WebAIM, which is one of those resources you'll probably hear us talk about a lot today. It's a great resource for all things accessibility, especially when you're just starting out. But this would be an example of a headline for like a cooking website. So you can see they have the H1, which is going to be their page title. 99% of pages only have one H1. And then you can see that they sort of organized the different heading levels to contain similar content. So all of the H2s, those are the difficulty levels for the recipes. All of the H3s, those are types of food. If there's a variation on a type of food, that's where you get the H4. But you can see that they never skip from an H2 to an H4, and that's one of the really important things when you're setting your heading tags is to not skip levels. That's going to help with reading order. And so that's a good example to kind of see how it's similar to a bulleted list and how you can organize your page. And you might be wondering how to actually add those heading tags to your website. At ICFL, we use WordPress, so I've included a couple screenshots from the back end of our website, but whatever platform you use, they should have a built-in feature for you to be able to do this. It just might look a little bit different. So on the left here, this is a screenshot of a text box. This is how we add content that's going to appear on the front end of our website. I highlighted the red in the red box, the drop down. If you click there, you would see all of the different heading levels, and that's how you're going to assign the heading tag to the line of text that you're working on. You can see on the right hand screenshot that shows the HTML of the text, and you can see that they automatically add the actual H1, H2 tags to your text. And that's important because that's what the screen reader is actually looking for when they're scanning the page. I think a misconception sometimes is that the headings are just about the style and what they look like. So you could think that, oh, if I want a heading level 2, I can see what font that is. I see what size it is. I know it's bolded, so I can make my text look like that. And on the front end, it would look the same. But when a screen reader is scanning your site, they're not going to pick up that that's a heading. They're going to skip right over it. So it's important to actually add the tags and not just do it for the styles. The styles get assigned with your website's theme, so you do have some control of what those look like. And all of the heading level ones, all the level 2s, those are all going to look the same across your website. Next, we're going to talk about alt text because I am willing to bet that your website has images on it. And so that means that your website should also be using alt text. So it has several functions. First and foremost, alt text is what a screen reader is going to announce in place of the image, but it's also what a browser would present if like it can't load an image. It's going to put the alt text in its place so people still know what's supposed to be there. And again, it's what a search engine is going to use. That's how they know what pictures your website contains. And we've listed some best practices here that you can see. The first one is it needs to be accurate. You don't want to say you have a picture of a dog when it's actually a picture of a cat. That one seems pretty straightforward. The next one we'll talk about a little bit more on the next slide, but basically you want to make sure it's relevant and that the context comes through. So when you're thinking about what to write for your alt text, you can consider why you chose this particular image and what information it's adding to the site. And that's kind of the information you want to try to envelop in your alt text when you're writing it. You want to make sure it's succinct, so you want to make it as short as possible without losing the relevant information. And that's because the screen reader, it's going to read the entire alt text. So nobody probably wants to listen to a 5-sentence description of this image. They just want the basic, what is it and why is it here? Screen readers are also going to announce that they're reading alt text, so people are going to know that it's talking about an image, so you don't have to start your alt text with, this is a picture of blank, this is an image of blank. And then lastly, if it's something that's just purely decorative and it's not adding any information to your page, you don't need to include alt text. An example of that, you can see the pretty orange triangle in the corner of the slide. Whether or not that triangle was there, you would get the same information from the slide. So that's an example of something that's just decorative. Okay, so we pulled this example from Harvard University. And so say you have this image on your website, you could just say that it is a picture of a mostly empty stadium. And that is accurate and that is short, so it follows a lot of those best practices. However, it's not really going to let anybody know why you've chosen to include this image of a mostly empty stadium on your page. So they give a few examples here of different ways you could write your alt text based off of what the content on your page is. So the one where they say Harvard Stadium with 2 lone runners bounding up the steps, that could be for a blog post on the track team, and they're calling attention to the athletes and the runners in that picture because that's what's relevant to that story. The next example is Harvard Stadium with cracked concrete pillars. That could be on a news article about upcoming construction to the stadium. And so you can see that they call attention to different parts of the picture based off of what they're trying to get, the value that that picture is adding to that particular page. And we're going to give you a lot of resources at the end that'll help you practice writing alt text. It can seem really overwhelming at first, but the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. And similar to alt text, we like to recommend avoiding using text and images. So an example of this, if you use Canva at all, you probably see this all the time. So if you're making something on Canva and you have a background image, but you add text on top of it, and then you save that and upload that to your website, that would be an example of text and image. And overall, assistive technology is not great at being able to scan that and read it. So if somebody's using a screen reader, they're not going to automatically have access to the text that's in that image unless you add it to your alt text, which again is going to become quite wordy, which is something you're trying to avoid. It's also a bad user experience for other types of assistive technology, and anybody who needs to alter your page at all to see it better, it's not going to be great for them. It's also harder for you as the website manager because anytime the information changes that you have in your picture, you're going to have to go in and make a completely new image, re-upload it to the site. That's taking up space on your website and it's taking up a lot of time for you. So it's just better kind of all around for everybody if you avoid that whenever possible. And then on top of photos, there are also other visual elements that are probably on your website somewhere, whether it's a map, a diagram, an infographic. Those are a lot more complex than your basic picture, but they do still require alt text because it's another visual element that's conveying information. So again, there's going to be resources at the end that can walk you through how to do this, but just keep in mind any visual elements on your website need to be accessible. And on top of having pictures on your website, you probably also have a lot of links. And so with hyperlinks, I think a lot of people know to avoid copying and pasting like the entire URL on a page. A screen reader is going to read that entire URL out loud, and a lot of them are very long and jumbled, and you don't really want to listen to that. So we use embedded links, which is when you attach the link to a selected piece of text, and that's called the hyperlink text. And when you're choosing which text to link, I see over and over again on websites, there's buttons and links that say, click here, learn more, read more. And that's not great for several reasons. First, it gives no indication as to where that link is going. Screen readers, often similar to headlines, they're just going to read a list of the links if somebody wants to get an idea of what's on the page. And sometimes they even alphabetize those links, so they're not even appearing in the order that you added them. And so if they're just hearing a bunch of click here, click here, click here, they're going to have no idea where you're trying to send them. It also becomes an issue when you use a bunch of click here's on one page, because you want to make sure that any link that's going to a new destination doesn't use the same hyperlink text, because again, if you think of them out of context of where they are on the page, which is how some people are coming across them, they're not going to know which link is going to which destination.
All right, and I'll jump in for this next section to talk a little bit about text styling. I feel like this could be an entire 1-hour webinar all its own. The question people often have is, what font should I be using in design? And unfortunately, there is not really one correct answer. In general, the sort of advice is that sans serif fonts are considered a bit more readable than serif fonts, and so serif fonts are the fonts that have like a little bit of a decorative element on the ends, like Times New Roman is kind of the most common one. Calibri, which we're looking at on this slide, is a sans serif font. So sans serif fonts are a bit less decorative, a bit more kind of like block text, and are in general considered more readable, but that's also not universally the case. Users with dyslexia might have a harder time distinguishing letters and words in these fonts, which it kind of gets back to the importance of designing with assistive technology in mind, because you're not going to pick a font that is going to work well for everyone. You can certainly consider fonts that are more likely to be better. And the key really is to think about how your website and the structure of it is going to be interacting with these different technologies and ways that people are interacting. And so this is very similar to what Haley was talking about with section headers and making sure you're following the framework that already exists in your website or the platform that you're designing in, and not trying to jump in and add other decorative elements on top of things. It's similar to text styling, that you just really want to stick with plain text. So if you're in your website, whatever that plain default text is, that's what the majority of your text should be, and you don't want to really be touching it beyond that. If you're the person that's deciding what that template looks like and what those fonts should be, the kind of main advice there is to pick fonts that are pretty popular and pretty commonly available, because this helps to ensure consistency across devices. If a browser doesn't recognize a font, it's going to default to a font that it does recognize. So it's best to use one that's kind of just more standard. So Arial is one that's considered relatively safe. Helvetica, those fonts that have been around a long time and that people are likely to have on their computers, are considered a good option most of the time. And then similarly, just avoid too much additional styling. So be very thoughtful in how you are using bold and italics. The kind of best practice advice is to just use them very sparingly. And that's for a lot of reasons. I mean, kind of as I was mentioning with fonts loading differently on different devices, consider, if this content looks a little bit different on somebody else's browser, if the bold isn't as obvious, or with a screen reader, depending on how it's tagged in the HTML. And I won't get too in the weeds. If anyone's interested, I can send some articles your way that have some more details about kind of the difference between this, like, for example, with bold, the strong HTML tag versus the B tag. And those are handled differently by screen readers. Strong, they will emphasize the word. If it's just the B, they're going to ignore it completely, which is kind of a long way of saying it's worth considering, like, what what information might be lost if people aren't getting those bold or italics cues? And then on the other hand, is it going to be distracting if I'm emphasizing too much text? And is it just better overall to think about how I can simplify and rewrite this text so that these additional stylistic elements aren't as necessary? And then a little bit more of a concrete, less, I guess, existential question is like, just like the best practice on websites is, unless it's a link, just don't underline text, because people tend to associate underlining with links. So just avoid it if it's not a hyperlink.
Okay, and then we're going to jump into the colors on your website. And this can be a really fun part of designing your website and trying to incorporate your brand colors and make everything look nice. But on top of making it look nice, you also need to consider if the colors you're using are accessible. So there's sort of two main things to think about here. The first is to avoid using color as the only way of conveying meaning. An example of this, we've been talking about hyperlinks. A lot of times, your hyperlinked text will be a different color than the surrounding text. But if that's all you do to indicate that it is a link, some people who have visual issues seeing different colors, or if a screen reader isn't going to call out that it's a different color, you're not going to be able to tell that it's a link. So that's why a lot of times links are also underlined on a website. So that gives another visual cue besides just color that is a link. So that's just one example. And then the other thing that you want to think about when you're using colors on your website is, do they have a good contrast? And color contrast is a measurement of the brightness between two different colors. It's measured as a ratio, and there's guidelines for how big that ratio needs to be. We'll talk about it a little bit in just a bit, but essentially you are looking at, for the most part, the color of your text and the color of whatever background that text is on, whether that's your page color or if it's a button, the color of the button, and making sure that that has a high enough contrast. And it's important to check and not just rely on your gut. I've included two of our brand colors here on a white background. The first is our really dark navy blue that has a super high contrast with white. It's always going to be okay to use as text, but our teal color has a much lower contrast, and it might look okay to you. You might be able to read that just fine, but for some folks, it's going to be really difficult for them to perceive that text on the screen. So it's important to always check, and there's a bunch of online tools to help you do that. So you don't have to memorize a bunch of numbers and color codes. It'll kind of do the work for you. And I can show you an example on the next slide. Perfect. So on the screenshot on the right there, this is from the WebAIM contrast checker. And I use this every day at work. I have it open on my computer all the time. It's super nice for checking the contrast. You can, in this box, you can either type in the hex code manually, or if you click on the color box, it'll give you an option to use the eyedropper tool, and you can pull colors directly from your web page. It'll give you the actual number for the contrast ratio, but it also gives you a very clear pass or fail in different situations for if those two colors are going to work on your page. You can see listed there the different ratios that you're aiming for. Again, you don't need to memorize these. The WCAG has two different standards. There's the AA and the AAA. The AA, if you're meeting that, you're going to be good with most of the accessibility laws and guidelines. But it's always a good idea to try to shoot for the AAA, just because you're going to be making your website that much more accessible to that many more people.
I wanted to quickly kind of, as we're wrapping up this discussion of best practices, kind of return to this idea of designing with accessibility in mind, and the sort of cascading benefits that can have. And it's this interesting thing when you're looking at some of these concepts for resources, you'll probably see like a set of guides that are related to accessibility, and then a set that are related to marketing, because they kind of often, like, designing with better accessibility in mind is also just better from a marketing perspective also. So just a few examples that I've included that we touched on. So with color contrast, which we were just talking about, it's also just better for glare on devices overall, which is important because people are bringing their devices everywhere and sitting in different environments. And it's a helpful way to ensure that people can engage with your content anywhere they are. It's similar to video captioning on videos, which are kind of an accessibility consideration, but also mean that if people are like in a crowded environment and can't listen to the volume, they can at least read the captions and still engage with your content. And as Haley mentioned, alt text is key for search engine optimization as well. So in addition to being an accessibility consideration, it's also going to help people navigate to your site and find your content if you're prioritizing alt text. And avoiding text as images is also just better practice when you're thinking about social media. The algorithm, if you run social media accounts, you've probably noticed that often if you have a lot of text on an image or text as images, in general, those aren't favored by the algorithms, and it's content that's more likely to be overlooked and not prioritized. So those are all ways that kind of keeping these things in mind can mean more impactful content overall, and can be just a better investment in your time in determining what you're going to prioritize. And there can be time spent in simplifying, but it often means more benefit going forward. And I did want to have a really brief little discussion about Canva. And if you aren't familiar with Canva, it's actually like a very wonderful tool. It's an online graphic design platform that's become very, very popular. And it's really great for a lot of reasons, because a lot of people can't hire a full graphic design position and are trying to quickly learn graphic design themselves. And Canva makes it really, really easy. There's a free version that includes a lot of templates that you can customize yourself. And so you can really quickly turn content around for social media, for flyers. It's also great for collaboration. So if multiple people are working on a project, it makes it really easy. So I'm not telling anyone not to use Canva at all. But I would advise you to be very thoughtful in how you are selecting templates from Canva and modifying them. Canva does often have a lot of templates that just aren't great from an accessibility standpoint. There's a lot of these very decorative fonts, and especially decorative fonts against colors that make it even harder to read. So I've included a few examples that are kind of, I feel like sort of standard Canva type things I see floating around on social media, that are just going to be more of a challenge for a lot of users beyond just assistive technology. It's just harder for people to often see what is happening in those visuals. And I do think Canva has been working to make improvements with accessibility in terms of like what the product looks like once it's downloaded. But if you are building sort of bigger documents in Canva that you're going to be kind of distributing through your website or other digital platforms, it's good to just plan to do a bit of extra work to make sure that those creations are accessible. So with this presentation, I've included some links that give some examples of that. And that's related not just to alt text, but also to the ordering of text boxes in documents, which is an element for screen readers. So there might be some more steps that follow, I will say, if you're designing in Canva, to maybe also still utilize Adobe or some other tools that might be available to check accessibility and make some tweaks to ensure that they're still accessible in a digital environment. Which kind of leads to, as I've mentioned a couple times, we'll share this presentation out, and then along with the recording, there will be the presentation as well, which include a lot of links. And a couple resources that I just wanted to call out. We've mentioned WebAIM a few times, and that's just because it's a really, really good website if you want a pretty simple explanation and really fast overviews of best practices. It's just a good one to refer back to. You can find really helpful guides and tools there. If you want to start playing around and getting a sense of accessibility out as you're navigating websites, there is an extension, a browser extension called the Wave tool that evaluates accessibility. So that can be a fun way, interesting way to start getting a sense of accessibility and what that looks like on websites. And you'll start, like I said, you'll start noticing. I think color contrast is one that people start noticing immediately, but also with hyperlinks and some of these other things we've mentioned. And then additionally, there are a lot of universities that have really great collections of web accessibility resources. And Boise State University is one of them. They have a really, really robust section of resources. They include some checklists too. So not just with web accessibility, but also thinking about accessibility for social media content, which is a kind of extra element that looks a little bit different in terms of how you're adding alt text, for example, just the mechanics of it. And they have some really great resources there. And related to the mention of thinking about alt text and accessibility when it comes to graphs and charts and some of these more complicated graphics, Boise State also has some really good guides in that realm as well. So we have included some links in the presentation. But this is also, I think, getting back to what I want to be one of the takeaways, which is that, yes, it's a lot of information and there's a lot, but you don't have to remember it all at once. It's so much of the first step is just knowing what to be aware of in the first place. And then there are so many resources, even if you were to just Google to quickly find some best practices. And if you're relying on tools like this, resources from universities, there are a lot of kind of very easy to understand and access guides to help you start making some of these tweaks and helping to kind of strive toward more accessibility in content. It can be a gradual shift and a learning curve, but there's a lot of free support materials that exist out there to help with that. And I was going to throw in just a really quick plug. This is a little bit more technical, but if you are interested in learning more about assistive technologies in particular, and some of the mechanics and some of what that looks like, which is relevant probably to a lot of your patrons and people that you're assisting in the digital sphere as well. The University of Idaho Extension's Digital Economy Program and the Idaho Assistive Technology Project are hosting a workshop next Tuesday, almost at this exact time, on Zoom, that kind of is giving the overview of those technologies. And so we've included a link to sign up for that as well if you're interested in learning more. And with that, I'll throw up this slide, which has our email addresses. Feel free, if there's anything in particular that you would like to kind of have a longer conversation about or would love some help compiling more resources to learn more about, we are more than happy to help with that. And at this point, we will open it up for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see everything a little bit better. All right, let's see if there's anything in the chat or in the Q&A. I'll throw this document in here while I'm thinking of it, but we'll share it out as well. So that if you wanted to kind of start scrolling through some of these links we've been referencing, again, not in a good accessible format because they are just straight up hyperlinks in the notes section, but a good kind of base to start exploring. But if anyone has additional questions, we do have some time and are happy to answer any of those.
Allison, could you share that again in the chat, but change it from hosts and panelists to everybody?
Yes, I can do that. That is not at all helpful since you have already seen it. There
Perfect.
you go.
Thank you. Yes. So while folks are formulating their questions or typing their questions, I just want to say thank you so much. It's been so great to work with Allison and Haley, who have this sort of design accessibility expertise in their back pocket. So they can be like, hey, what if we did this instead? Which is super helpful. Can we get the link you mentioned? Is a question.
I mentioned a lot of links, which are all in the notes section. Diane, if there's a particular, if you were talking about the one I just mentioned, yes, let me see if I can quickly copy that and I'll throw that in. Oh, this is a good question from Dina. If there are one or two things to get started with, where might people focus their energy for impact? Haley, do you want to take that while I'm looking for this link quickly?
Sure. I think the heading tags, and that kind of goes along with the reading order on your page, is really useful because, again, that's going to really help with screen readers and other assistive technology to be able to access the content that you already have. I also think that the color contrast is huge. A lot of website tools, it's called global options. So if you change the colors of your headings and that sort of thing, that's going to go across your entire website. So that's a really simple way. If you're like, oh no, the blue we're using everywhere for all of our headings, people can't see that. Instead of having to go in and change every single instance of that blue, you can talk to your web designer, or if that's you, go in and update those colors. That's the very simple step to make it more accessible. Do you have any other suggestions, Allison?
I think those are the big ones for sure. And like with the color contrast, like you were saying, it's sort of like almost an everyday thing. If you're designing in Canva, the great thing about Canva is that it's very easy to see the little codes for the colors you're designing, and then it makes it very easy to start checking contrast and just start just getting more familiar and comfortable yourself with just kind of understanding what that is. And you'll start having a better sense even without needing to check with the tools about whether it's working or not.
Another question, is there a screen reader you would recommend for patron access PCs?
Yeah, I will say I'm not necessarily the expert in like the best screen reader, or like the logistics of all of the different kinds of assistive technologies. There are so many different versions of screen readers out there, and a lot of them are free. You hear about JAWS a lot. That's one that's very common, but I believe that one you do have to pay. So there are a lot of other options out there. And Haley, do you have any other thoughts about that before we jump into that next question? Yeah. And then we have a question, how can you remove formatting settings that are stubborn? Example, header 1 in previous line of text attaches itself to body text in next line. Haley, do you have kind of best practices? I often just like to sort of do like a copy and paste sometimes with like as a plain kind of no formatting option. Do you have other kind of tools to help with that, Haley?
Yes, so it is stubborn sometimes. We use WordPress. I'm not sure what you're using, but when you're adding the tags, the line that you have your cursor at the beginning of, everything in that section is going to be affected by the tag. But sometimes it does add it to the whole thing. So if you start at the top and work your way down, that's one way to do it. You can also use separate text boxes for your headings versus your body text. So if you're applying the tag to the entire text box, if it's separate, then it can have its own tag.
Help too, like if you're using WordPress, I mean, sometimes just jumping into the HTML side is like the easiest way to start fixing that too. And that's the nice thing about a lot of web platforms is that it makes it pretty easy, even if you're not an expert in HTML, to kind of make those small tweaks here and there.
It looks like Dina just put a link in the chat with a list of screen reader resources.
Actually, just directly reaching out to the Idaho Assistive Technology campus office would be a great starting point too. That's a lot of what their focus is on, and so they can provide some more guidance on some of the technicalities there for sure.
Great. Any other questions? We use JAWS at our library and it's a great tool. Awesome. Yeah, I think the best resource would be talking probably to that Idaho Assistive Technology office, because like the people that I would want to chat with are the people that are using that technology, because the way that I would use like the screen reader technology is probably very different from the way that someone who actually needs it would use it. And so they would have completely different opinions and preferences about like what's important and valuable for them. So getting their perspective, I think, would be really, really great. Cool. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions. I think we can wrap it up with a few minutes to spare. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and thank you so much to Allison and Haley for presenting. I'm going to stop the recording now.